Greetings fellow gorehounds and welcome back to another Blood Splattered vlog. And this week we're going to talk about the latest horror thriller currently in theaters right now, Bad Samaritan, starring David Tennant. And I gotta say, I really like this post-Doctor Who phase of David Tennant's career, where it feels like his most successful performances lately have been him playing psychopathic misogynists. Like for example, when he played Kilgrave on Jessica Jones, he was hands down one of the best things on that show. I mean, it was a good show in general, but he was one of the best things on it, bar none. And this film, Bad Samaritan, is no different. He does an amazing job playing this psychotic trust fund kid who locks women in his office and ties them up with leather like they're a fucking horse and then tries to break them. And he is creepy and he is scary and he's disturbingly charming, to the point where I was sitting here watching this movie and thinking back to that Fright Night remake he was in and realizing that he was cast in the wrong role. I mean, yeah, he was okay as that movie's version of Peter Vincent, but he would have been way better as the vampire. And this movie fucking proves it because he is sexy and he is scary at the same time. But anyway, for those of you who have not seen the trailer for this movie, essentially what this movie is about is David Tennant is this psychopathic misogynist, but one day our main character, who is an Irish immigrant living in Portland, who also happens to be an artist and a photographer, but that really doesn't pay the bills, so at night he's a valet parker, but he has this side hustle in which he uses his valet parking job to rob people's houses. Which basically works like this: when he gets their car, he uses the technology in their car, like their GPS system, to take the car back to their house and then uses the garage clicker to get into their house. And then once inside, he basically uses his technological know-how to steal something that they won't notice is missing. For example, when he breaks into David Tennant's house, who is this rich trust fund guy, he finds an unopened credit card within his mail pile, and then he uses the house phone to engage the credit card, and now he has a free credit card. And he and his buddy can use it to buy whatever the fuck they want. So yeah, that's basically what our main character does, but when he breaks into David Tennant's house, he finds a girl tied up. And because he has broken into this house illegally, he doesn't know what to do with this girl, even though he knows he should help her. But if he were to call the police, he might go to jail himself. And that basically sets up the entire premise of this movie, which is a giant cat and mouse game between the main character and David Tennant. And I gotta say, I thoroughly enjoyed this movie from start to finish, even though there were parts of it that were a little rough. For example, the beginning of this movie had a lot of expositional dialogue that felt really clunky. Stuff like the main character talking to his dad and saying, "Well, you are my dad," even though the context of the situation made it very clear he was his dad, and we didn't need him to say it. And it really didn't feel natural that he did say it, and there's just a lot of that in the beginning of this movie. That being said, once the plot proper kicks off, the movie really smoothens out. It stops being a bumpy ride and starts being a total thrill ride. Though I will say there are parts in the movie where I did find myself questioning the main character's choices, but the movie eventually does a really good job of getting into the psychology of why he made the choices he makes, so his mistakes stop being a problem for me once the movie acknowledges they are mistakes. The other minor complaint I want to talk about is that there is a law enforcement subplot in this movie, and that subplot felt really Law and Order light. Especially when they used this subplot to explain the psychology of the villain, and it just felt really on the nose and unnecessary, and I felt like they should have shown instead of told. But outside of those complaints, I really enjoyed this movie, and I thought it was really thrilling and scary and creepy. I thought both David Tennant and the main character did a really good job with their performances. Especially David Tennant, he really steals the show in this movie, which is understandable because even though he's playing the villain, this really is a David Tennant vehicle. So I suppose that was expected of this movie. You expect David Tennant to kick ass. Which he does, and I realize I'm running out of things to say without going to the spoilers, so let's move on to the spoilers. But before we do, I do want to warn that there is animal death in this movie. There is a point in which David Tennant's character kills a horse, so be warned about that, and as per usual, I'm going to include some sort of Amazon affiliate link in the description below, and if you click that link and buy or rent something with that link, then I will get a kickback from it. And with all that said, my fellow gorehounds, let us finally move on to the spoilers. Alrighty then, so as I said in the pre-spoiler section of this review, our main character is an Irish immigrant slash photographer slash artist who doesn't really make a lot of money through his day job, so at night he does a valet job in which he steals from people's houses when he takes their cars. But he doesn't do the thieving on his own, he actually has a partner who does the job with him. And the two of them basically rotate turns as to who's gonna steal this time, while the other one stays behind and warns the one thieving about when the people are gonna come to get their car. So by necessity, it is a two-man job, but it's very obvious these two are really good friends. And it's also established really early on that the main character's best friend who's doing this job with him, he comes from a family with a long criminal history, so if he goes to jail, he's gonna get stabbed to death because of shit that his family did. So it is within the main character's best interest to not have his best friend go to jail. And the other important thing to note is that the main character has a code. He doesn't steal from people that seem to be good people. Which means enter David Tennant's character, who is this rich, snobby trust fund dude with this fancy-ass car and this big attitude to boot. It is a no-brainer when our main character takes that car back to David Tennant's place to steal his shit. But unfortunately, while he's there, he finds this room that is locked, and operating under the logic that no one locks a door unless valuables are inside, he picks the lock and once inside finds a girl all chained up. And because he's broken into this house, he doesn't want to call the police because he doesn't want to go to jail, so he tries to untie the girl, but she is quite literally chained up with chains and leather. So he volunteers to go downstairs to get some bolt cutters, but before he goes downstairs, the girl warns him that he monitors the room through his phone randomly, so the main character should put her back the way he found her before he goes downstairs. That way David Tennant is not alerted to the fact that someone has broken into his house. Now granted, it would have been hard for him to come home early anyway because the main character has his car, but they make it really clear later on that the main character had thought about that, but he was so freaked out he didn't know what to do. It was one of those things where in the moment he was operating on adrenaline and not thinking straight, which is what allows me to let go of the fact that the main character doesn't actually end up saving the girl. Because by the time he gets back upstairs with the bolt cutters, he sees that David Tennant is monitoring the room and totally freaks out and leaves. He gets the car back to David Tennant and then tells his friend everything that happened. So he and his best friend freak out, with his best friend explaining to him that there's nothing he can do, he's gonna go to jail, and if he goes to jail, he's gonna die. But the main character making it very clear that no, he has to save this girl. So the main character decides to leave an anonymous tip to the cops, but to make sure the deed is done, he drives over to the house and stakes out the house when the cops arrive. But by the time he gets there, David Tennant has already figured out everything that's gone on and he has cleaned up everything. And he stashes the girl somewhere and calls another girl over to be his boo, so that when the cops arrive, they think it was all just a misunderstanding. From this point forward, it becomes a cat and mouse game between David Tennant and the main character. Because it turns out David Tennant has monitoring cameras all around his house, so he very much figures out who broke into his house before the main character realizes he knows. And so David Tennant sets out to ruin the main character's life systematically. He breaks into the main character's house and steals a bunch of stuff that he uses to do this, uses the main character's Facebook page to go to his girlfriend's page and tell her, bitch, we're breaking up, and then uses the main character's SIM card to post nude pictures of his girlfriend everywhere. So his girlfriend's school all gets to see her nude, and she thinks that he's mad at her for no reason. And on top of that, David Tennant disguises himself as the main character online and gets the girlfriend to come meet him, where David Tennant wears his jacket and beats the shit out of her in an alley. So she ends up hospitalized for the rest of the movie. And that is just the tip of the iceberg of the shit David Tennant does in this movie. He ruins this kid's life just hardcore. And the main character is going to the police with all the information he has, but the police don't believe him, which leads to him going to the FBI, and the FBI seems to not believe him, but there's one person there that does, because the photo he has of the girl in the room matches up with a missing persons file, which is also linked to this one serial murder case, because they're pretty sure she was taken by this one serial murderer that they haven't caught yet. So for the rest of the movie, the main character is feeding all this information to this FBI agent, while David Tennant is doing shit like getting his mom fired, getting his dad fired, and at one point killing his best friend in cold blood, and then making it look like his best friend committed suicide. Except he knows it wasn't suicide because he was on the phone with the friend at the time, so he heard everything, and on top of that, by taking a screenshot with the phone, he gets a pretty clear picture of David Tennant that he sends to the FBI. And the FBI figure out who he is. He's this trust fund kid who, when he was a kid, he was infatuated with his dad's horse trainer. But then when the training wasn't working, he tried to break in a horse himself, which ultimately led to him killing a horse. And then when his trainer went to go tell his dad about what he did, he ultimately killed the trainer that he was infatuated with. But because he was a minor and his dad was rich, he got off on a really light sentence. And all these plot threads ultimately culminate in the main character tracking down the girl to this one cabin in the woods, where there is a huge showdown between the main character, the survivor girl, and David Tennant, with the police ultimately arriving. And as for what actually happens, I'm not going to tell you, because you're going to have to see the movie yourself to find out how this ends. But trust me, it is a total thrill ride once you get past its minor flaws, and I thoroughly enjoyed it and I highly recommend it. And with all that said, my fellow Gorehounds, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so that you're notified of my videos immediately upon their upload. And as always, peace out, my fellow Gorehounds, and I'll catch y'all later.